Each year, an estimated 600,000 people go missing in the United States. Many are found unharmed. Some are found dead. Then there are those whose fate is unknown. The National Missing and Unidentified Persons System reports that 4,400 unidentified bodies are recovered yearly, with about 1,000 of the remains unidentified after 1 year.
Child Last Seen. It's a story about a 15-year-old girl who goes to hang out with a friend and is never seen again.
When a young person disappears, it's a tragedy and a heartache for the family and for people in the community. It's just something that people never really get over.
Hi, I'm Lainey Law, and this is About the Law.
And I'm attorney Andrew Myers, and joining us today is author Maureen Boyle. Maureen, thank you for joining us this morning.
Oh, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
I guess the first question I have for you is Child Last Seen is about a 15-year-old girl in Pennsylvania who disappears off the face of the earth. Well, I know you wrote a previous book that kind of led you to this, but you're from New England. You've been in New England pretty much your entire life. Why did you pick this story of all the true crime stories that are out there?
Well, I was led to this story from my second book, which was The Ghost, which was the story of the murder of a Saxonburg, Pennsylvania police chief by a low-level mobster from Massachusetts. And while I was down in Saxonburg and talking to the investigators and wrapping up that book, one of the investigators had mentioned this case, Child Last Seen, and said, you really should do something about this case. It really is quite fascinating. And the more he talked about it, the greater interest I had in it. And I did say to him, I need more than just you saying this is a great case. I need some case files and some paperwork on it, more than just people's recollections of it, because I knew I'd be doing a lot of the research remotely. And he had just about his entire case file, and he gave me a copy of it, and that made things a lot easier in terms of contacting witnesses and people that were involved in the case. So it was a natural progression from my second book.
Okay, so I don't want to give away too much, but I know maybe we should tell more of the background of the story. So let's do that first. Patty Desmond was a 15-year-old girl, and I guess she wanted to go out, and her parents didn't want her to go out, so she went out anyway. Give us a thumbnail before I ask you a slew of questions.
Yeah, Patty was sort of a shy girl. She was bullied when she was much younger. She was one of 6 in her family. Her mother was a widow, and she was struggling. This is in the 1960s, so she was struggling to support the family. And this was a time when women did not have a lot of opportunities for high-paying jobs. So they were always struggling financially. Patty was the youngest girl. There was 3 boys, 3 girls. Patty was the youngest girl. And she was, the best way to describe it is, she's a teenage girl looking for love, looking for attention. She was not a beautiful girl, but she was drawn to what I would call a bad boy. And a lot of women can appreciate when you say that teenage girls somehow getting hooked up with a bad boy when they're very, very young. It's very intriguing. They are interesting characters, but they grow out of it. So she hooked up with this guy, Conrad Miller. Conrad Miller had a criminal record. He was 19, she was 15. She was a sophomore in high school. He was out of school, he was married, and he had an infant child. So her mother disapproved of the relationship and told her not to hang around with him. Patty, of course, she probably thought she was in love and snuck out of the house to go to hang out with him and his friends. They had pulled up to the house. She snuck out and met up with him. And that was, she was not seen alive after that night.
So she was never seen again. She goes out of the house. It was December, as I understand it.
Yes.
She was never seen alive again. Did the police, and I know you rely on relationships with police for your work, but
Yeah.
did the police do enough to find this girl?
Well, we have to go back. It was 1965. It was a whole different way of investigating cases. Teenage girls at that point, or any teenager who disappeared, generally they were considered runaways. And in some cases, families couldn't even report them missing immediately. In Patty's case, after the mother reported her missing, the local police did talk with Conrad Miller, who was the last person to see her, and followed up on all of his stories. He claimed that he talked with her, and he dropped her off near a fire hall in a nearby community, and she was going to be going to a friend's house. They talked to the friend. The friend did not see her that night. And police, right from the start, did not believe Conrad Miller's story, but they could not disprove it. And that was one of the main problems in trying to solve the case. They had no body. They believed eventually that she was dead, but they had no body, and they really could not charge him. There was always that concern. If they charge him with murder and it goes to trial and they get an acquittal and then they find her body and they have enough evidence to charge him, they can't, there's double jeopardy there.
Yeah, and as we all know, especially you, at any criminal trial, the evidentiary standard is that they've got to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, and there's always a problem if there's no body. Maureen, one of the points that you made in your book is that cold cases, and there are a lot of them, even with today's DNA evidence technology, there are still a lot of cold cases. Why is that?
Oh, a lot of the cases are very, very old, and evidence collection was a little bit different back in, say, the 50s, 60s, 70s, and even into the 80s. The use of DNA wasn't around. They were relying primarily on fingerprints and eyewitness testimony. And eyewitness testimony, of course, can be suspect sometimes because people misremember things. There weren't cell phones. There was,
No.
All the things that people take for granted today did not exist in the 1960s. It did not exist in the 1970s. Even into the 1980s, the widespread use of cell phones, it just did not exist.
So back to my question, now that we have all that, and I'm sure you're familiar with the Kohlberg case where they found him through his electronic tracing, why are there so many cold cases even now that there is DNA and cell phones? And they have one of the ways they caught Alex Murdaugh was the tracking in his car. Now that we have all of these things, how come there are still so many cold cases?
Some of it may be because they don't have a suspect, or they may be able to triangulate the cell phone service and locations, but they don't know who the person is that they don't have a name to it. That's one of the reasons. But generally, you will find that more and more of the cases are being solved. You're going to be seeing fewer and fewer cold cases, or the cases that people assume are cold really aren't. That they've always had a suspect, as you know, that they can have suspects, but they just don't have enough evidence to prove it in court.
Right. One of the things that I really enjoyed about your book is that you have a lot of little you're an old print journalist. In this context, can we use the word sidebar?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, you can.
So there are a lot of sidebars in your book, if you will, where you kind of dive into an area of the law, but in words that I think pretty much anyone can understand. And one of those vignettes in your book was about the polygraph test. And what do you think about the polygraph test?
I think the polygraph test is a good tool. It is not, accurate, but it's a good tool for investigators to just get a feel for an individual, whether they may be deceptive. But as you know, polygraph tests are not admissible, but they can be used to help investigators go down a certain path or not a certain path. The danger with a polygraph, because they aren't completely accurate, is that they could also eliminate a possible suspect because they pass a polygraph and that might be the person.
Right.
Mhm.
One of the other areas that you dive into is that yellow crime tape that some of us have actually seen.
Yeah.
And, if you
Yep.
watch the Forensics Files or any of those shows on TV, you see that yellow tape. And I just always assumed the police went around and put that up with a second thought. But according to your book, there's actually some kind of a science that they learn in the police training academy about what's the science behind the yellow tape.
Yep. It goes back for years and years and years. It is to, in many cases, map out the crime scene, in addition to keeping the public out and keeping reporters out from trampling the scene. But it gives them the four corners of where to look, particularly with outdoor scenes. It gives them the area, the section to examine.
Okay.
And if they're doing a dig also, digging up a body, it will give them the area to search.
Right. So
And
there's actually
generally,
there's actually some thought that goes into not only where they put the tape, but the fact that it's there and what the reasons that they're putting it there. One of the other vignettes or sidebars in your book, and it's one of the things that was early in the book and it really drew me in, was in the area that she grew up in way back in the 60s, domestic violence. And there were allegations that the father was involved with that, with the wife. Domestic violence really wasn't even taken serious as a crime. And I don't know, can you speak more to that? It's hard to believe now.
Yeah, in the 1960s, it still was. It was not against the law. If a wife was beaten, that was not a crime. It was generally in those situations, a police officer would show up at the house and maybe send the husband away and just separate the parties, and there was nothing to keep him back from returning. The whole issue of restraining orders in domestic violence cases that we all just take for granted today really was not in existence back then. There weren't domestic violence shelters. There weren't support groups. Even the term battered women really didn't come into play until much later.
Yeah, I know that domestic violence petitions now, you go to court and it's sad, but often we civil attorneys, and I'm a civil attorney, we have to sit and wait while they go through all of those petitions. There are usually quite a number of them, but I'm old enough to remember when there really weren't that many of them. There weren't any. And so one of the things you pointed out in the book was that and I think you just said this, the term battered women really didn't even exist until what, the 70s, 60s?
Yeah, 70s, yes. Late 60s, 70s, and that was, and then that movement, part of the women's movement, really, that is what propelled changes in the law to protect women who are abused.
Do you think that now, with your own experience going through this, because, obviously this case is from a while back, now doing the research, you're working with police investigators who are largely men, do you find it difficult getting your information, or do you feel like, the attitude's a little bit better? How is your research process, and knowing that you are, technically, I want to say, like, a minority, we're in a patriarchal society. How do you find that interaction impacts you?
Oh, in terms of law enforcement in the court system?
When you're trying to do your research and get information in that regard with police.
I have never had any problems with that. I mean, there's always one or two people that are, for lack of a better word, a bit of a jerk. But overall, they've been very, very helpful and
That's good.
very forthcoming with information. Generally, the individuals that are reluctant to provide information or are a bit crude and they often aren't really deeply involved in the case, and they're just,
Being difficult.
and puffing out their chest like, oh yes. Those that have the information and those individuals that are professional and are hardworking, they are more than willing to share their stories.
How much time does it take to research a book like this?
It has taken Shallow Graves for the hard. My first book for the hard research took 2 years, but again, I had 30 years of prior research into that case. My second book took 2 years, and this one took about 1.5 years.
What's your next book?
I've got two things that I am researching right now. One of them is a Massachusetts murder, and another one involves a historic New Hampshire murder where I don't have to talk to any living people, thank goodness. Where the victims and everyone is long dead. So,
what makes you think that true crime fanatics, why do you think people are more drawn to this kind of material that gets people so immersed into these stories?
There's a lot of theories on that. One is particularly women. Well, women appear to be a large market for true crime, is that they want to know how the crimes happen and how women are victimized. And the reason for that is that way they can protect themselves in the future. If you know how someone broke into the house, if you know how someone lured someone out of a building, if you know how someone attacked and kidnapped someone in a parking lot, and you can protect yourself so the same thing doesn't happen to you. That's one. I buy into that.
That's a fair point. Yeah, where it's just more of from a place of anxiety and fear, wanting to know the ins and out, and feeling like it could happen to you.
Yes. I mean, I'm very, very careful in locking all the windows and the doors, and double locking things. You get in your car and you make sure all the doors are locked. And when I got my latest car and it doesn't have a key for the ignition, I'm thinking, well, when you're walking to your car, and most women have done this, you always hold your key in between. Yep, just like you hold the key in between your fingers. And if you have a fob, what do you have? So
it's point the fob at someone.
Yes, chirp them away. But then you've got your car keys or something else there. But you're so trained to do that. It's
that's a good point that you bring up there with the key fob. A lot of on TikTok I've seen they have these little survival kits, and it's it gives you a keychain that has something spiky. Just we never want to use that, but that is an interesting thing that I would have never considered. That people see the situation and they're putting themselves in those shoes and trying to not be that victim.
And then there's another theory of people that they're fascinated by true crime because it is outside their realm of in their sphere of living, where they find it tantalizing and they find it intriguing, or they are interested in the mystery of it. And then of course there's the crazy people who are just get off on it.
So that's That's the answer to the question, why are there so many people out there that are fascinated, and what is the fascination with true crime? Let's turn that around. Why do you delve into all of this? Of all the things that you've been involved in, you've observed politics, you've observed municipal affairs, you've observed all kinds of things in your career as a journalist and a professor. Why is it true crime that you focus on? What motivates you?
It is, I think, the truest type of reporting, because you are dealing with people, you're dealing with victims, and you're dealing with true life, and you're seeing people at their worst and you're seeing people at their best. And I had also covered crime for the bulk of my career in Massachusetts. So I kind of fell into it, and I do find it fascinating. I find crime investigations fascinating. I find the law fascinating. I find what goes on in the courtroom and in the hallway of courtrooms fascinating. And just the sheer emotion of what goes on in both on the street during police investigations and in the hallways and in the courtrooms once it moves into the legal system. I've always tried to look at the stories beyond the just the facts, and what is the overall story there.
Let me ask you this. And I'm trying to bring up a different slide. There it is. There's the publicity picture of you for this book. Maureen, I counted 5 typewriters in the background. 5
Yes.
typewriters. What gives?
Okay, it started off as a project for a course that I was teaching. I mean, one of them I already had when I was working at the Standard Times in New Bedford, and they computerized things. It was one of the last newspapers that were still using typewriters when I got there. And they were selling the typewriters for $10. And I brought one home. And I, of course, had my other typewriters from college. And then I was teaching the development of American news media, a fancy name for journalism history. And I realized that the students in the class never used typewriters. Some of them have never seen typewriters, maybe in an old movie. I mean, think about it.
Yeah.
I've never seen one in person.
She's never even seen one. I have an old broken, the old Selectrix typewriters. They were the state of the art. Well, I have an old one and I have one that doesn't work correctly. And there's a shop about 25-mile drive from here that'll fix it for me. But I'm like, why would I take it over there and fix it? And I had a paralegal that looked in the supply closet for something else, and she looked at it. She said, "What is this?" She didn't even know what it was. So,
and those were great.
Yeah, the Selectrics were fantastic. They were kind of a precursor to the computers we have now because they would type out a sentence. I had my old college. Do you want me to send it down to you? I'll give it to you if you want it. No, okay.
Make it fix.
I had my old electric typewriter from college, and it turns out my granddaughter is fascinated by these things, and so I gave it to her. Do you want me to take it back and give it to you?
Yeah. Well, when I first, I had one whole session where I brought in all the typewriters, set it up in the studio, and I'll never do that again. I'm going to move them, have them in a different room closer to my office because some of those typewriters are really, really heavy. And watching the students go around to each of the typewriters and typing on them, and particularly the electric typewriters, and hitting the return bar, and it would go, as they were typing and hearing the ding. One of the students like, oh, what was that? What was that? And, hitting typing away and hearing bing and returning back. It is, it's like what many of us take for granted. There's a whole generation that is, amazed by it, just as
Yeah.
there is a generation that never used a rotary phone.
I'll say this about my high school. One of the most valuable things I got in high school was they made us take a typing class. And way back when I went to high school, and that's the most valuable thing I learned in well, I guess some other stuff, but I mean, I had a typing class, Mrs. McDonald, I remember her, and she would go around and watch us all. She'd walk around the room, but that's one of the most valuable skills I gained in high school. As you know, I was a TV reporter, and I could come back at 5:30, and for the 6 o'clock news, I could bang out a story really quickly because I had that skill. But anyhow, let's get back to the subject at hand. I just had a couple more.
But go. One other thing that you learned in typing class was how to sit up properly, how to put your hands down properly, and I think that saved a lot of us from getting carpal tunnel. With
you know what, that's a good point. Even like using the keyboard, like I've never had a typing class. I have my hand on that mouse and it's just like you feel it rubbing up on the table and it's just like, all right, there goes my bones.
I've never thought of that, but I've never thought about the carpal. I mean, I tend to slouch a lot. People are always telling me sit up straight, but I think maybe you're right about the carpal tunnel because I've had a lot of clients over the years. I do some workers' compensation work and I've had a number of clients that get carpal tunnel, and I've always wondered, geez, I hope I don't get that because I do spend a lot of time typing. Was there anything else? Let's get back to the book really quickly. Was there anything else about the book that you that I didn't ask you that you'd like to tell us?
One of the themes of the book, I really think, I hope people come away with noticing, is that how justice eventually is done. It may not always be the way we want it to be, but I'm a firm believer that eventually justice is done.
Even I know that the attorney generals in both Massachusetts and New Hampshire have hired people in the attorney general's office just to look at cold cases. That's their job. And so, I'm sure you watch the TV. I watch the TV. I'm kind of addicted to TV news. I watch it all the time. But you see cold cases every day that either they've found the person that did it, or they're working. They'll bring up a story and they'll say, we're working on this story of a woman who disappeared back in the 1980s, and they're working on it. Do you hold any hope that this will help solve some of these cases?
I do. And we have to also remember that, a lot of these cases are solved through DNA. But often there is no DNA in cases, or the DNA is degraded. Again, like in the 1980s, late 80s, early 90s, when DNA was finally accepted into the courts, even the testing of DNA was very different than it is today. And they needed much larger samples than they do today. And a lot of the samples, of course, got destroyed in the testing process itself. And they needed, if the samples were too small, they often did not test it because they needed to have a large enough sample so the defense could also test it themselves if the case is coming up for trial.
Well, yeah, I understand what you're saying, but I mean, then the next question I have is, even if they did take enough DNA from a rape kit or whatever, how long does that DNA, does it last forever? Does it last 30 years? What's the expiration date on a DNA sample? Do we know?
If they preserve it well enough, the DNA, there's been cases of cases solved with DNA going into like 40 years back.
Wow. Okay. What you kind of alluded to what your next book is, and if you don't want to tell me, you don't have to tell me. But having lived in and out of New Hampshire for years and years and years, you said one of them's a New Hampshire case. Will you spill the beans, or would you rather wait?
I'm going to wait because I have a lot more work to do on it. I've got, I'd say, a quarter of the research done on it, and it's one of those things when you start doing research and the more you get, the more you know you need. And I got a lot of library research, and I did a lot of research looking at original paperwork and letters and some other information about this case. It's a murder case.
Okay.
But not enough that I can see it in my head to write the scenes. So I've got
How
to
long
do.
does finding that research typically take you? Like, what is the timeline on a process like writing one of these books?
The research, it depends on the cases. Obviously, in Massachusetts cases, where I'm based in Massachusetts, it's a little bit easier because there's less travel time, and I can reach people to talk with much easier. I can travel to see them, like on a Friday afternoon. But if, individuals that are out of state, it takes a little bit more time. When I was going into Saxonburg, Pennsylvania, that was 11 hours from where I live. But that was a bit
That's
of a
dedication.
hike. Yes.
I was going to ask you, now that you're a professor and an author, I was going to ask you if you miss being a reporter, but it sounds like there's still a reporter inside of you.
Yes, writing true crime is a new challenge. As you know, the newspaper business or the news business has changed dramatically since when I first started, where there was a really distinct line between radio, TV, and newspapers. And obviously the internet has changed all that. And now, print reporters are shooting video on their phones and also doing podcasts, so that they are radio reporters in a way, and they're sort of TV reporters in a way. And TV reporters are writing for the web, and the radio reporters are doing the same thing. They're writing for the web and they're shooting video. I mean, one time I was at a murder scene, going to a lot of murder scenes, but I was at a murder scene, and the photographer I was with, he's got his, $1,000 camera shooting the scene, and this was a while ago, and this cheap other little camera that he's shooting video on, and next to him is a photographer from one of the television stations with $250,000 camera on the tripod, and a cheap little phone shooting still photos for the web.
Yes.
So it's
I know exactly what you're talking about. I mean, the TV reporters that come from the cities and from the networks, they have these $250,000 cameras. And by the way, the technology changes about every 3 years on average. So they have a new $250,000 camera every 3 years, but they have not only, the highly paid, polished reporter with the $2,000 Brooks Brothers suit, but they've got the reporter, they've got the sound person, and they have a producer with them, all out attacking the same story. And as you just pointed out, now with a podcast, you can just take I'm looking for my cell phone. I know it's around, but you can do an entire, and people do podcasts. I saw a TV reporter one time doing the whole thing herself. She set up her own tripod. She set up her own little teeny camera, and she had a little clip-on microphone. She did the whole thing herself. And so there was no one else involved, and she was working for one of the TV stations. So
yes,
it's the other thing that's sad is, many years ago, longer ago than either one of us want to admit, in that business, you'd get the newspaper and it was like this. The Sunday newspaper was like this, and it would take you 2 or 3 cups of coffee to get through it. Now, even the Sunday paper isn't even much thicker than my notes here. And it's sad that the newspaper industry has gone the way it has, but we've gone kind of far afield from the topic, which is your book.
Go on.
Go ahead.
Oh, yeah. So, I bailed, perhaps bailed is not the correct term, but I left newspapers, I think, at just the right time, before it got completely crazy. But I was there long enough to see how it changed and where the direction it was going, moved to teach in college, and continued writing eventually after I detoxed from daily news. That's what I always call it, a detox, to writing long form, which was more of a challenge.
It's probably more rewarding too, though, I would think, long form.
Yeah, it is because it pushes me more, pushes my writing more. Towards the end of my newspaper career, I was writing 6 stories a day because at one point I was covering both police and courts, and it's 2 different worlds. And
don't forget that fire that broke out while you're writing the other stories,
Yes.
and you absolutely positively had to go and get the fire and talk to witnesses and the police chief.
Yes, exactly.
People watch TV or read the newspaper and they don't even have a clue how much work goes into. Maybe you did a story that was 300 words and they don't know how much work it took you to do that. Okay, before we head off, any parting words, anything else you want us to tell the public about your book?
I hope people come away with it remembering Patty Desmond, who is the young woman who went missing and was later found dead. I hope they remember her family, and I hope that they also remember all the Patty Desmonds that are out there who are still missing, and their families are still in that gray area of grief and hope. And that's what I hope people take away from the book.
Okay. Maureen, very serious. Thank you very much. Thank you for being with us today. We appreciate it. Lainey?
Thank you so much, everybody who's watched up until this point. If you got to this point, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe on this video, and be sure to check out Maureen's book, Child Last Seen.
Thank you. Hope we can get a thumbs up from you and a subscribe. Maureen, thank you for your time.
Yes.
I know you're busy this
Thank
time
you.
of year.
Yeah, all right. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me on.
You have been watching About the Law, a production of the law offices of Andrew D. Myers in Methuen in the Merrimack Valley of Massachusetts and in Derry, just outside of Manchester, New Hampshire. Remember to click the like and subscribe buttons down below. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to share it with your friends and others. If you'd like to talk to me about an injury case, a car accident, a slip and fall, a serious bodily injury case, or some other case, please feel free to contact me. I'd love to talk to you. You can contact us through my website at attorney-myers.com. We have a contact us block, or you can call on one of the telephone numbers we've given there, or you can email me at andrew@attorney-myers.com. The foregoing is offered for informational purposes only. It is not intended as and does not constitute legal advice. Laws vary widely from state to state. You should rely only on the advice given to you during a personal consultation by a local attorney thoroughly familiar with state laws and the area of practice in which your concern lies. This podcast must be and hereby is labeled advertisement in some jurisdictions.